Well, good morning again. Now we're going to get into the fun part of the morning, get the panel started. Those of you that got a chance to go out and get a breath of fresh, cool air, or I know you're energized and ready to go. On behalf of Leidos, I'd like to welcome you to the Contested Logistics AUSA Hot Topic Series, and thank all of you for joining today. My name's Clark Lee Masters. I'm representing the great Leidos team, and specifically our Army and Joint Logistics Division. Our longstanding partnership as a company with AUSA is incredibly important to us, and Leidos proudly supports the Army team, those soldiers, their families, and those amazing Army civilians that we've talked about already this morning. As an innovation company, it is Leidos' mission to support the Army through more resilient supply chains and mission-ready communications, products, and training. Our 47,000 employees work every day to solve critical problems for our customers, especially when logistics plays a central role in their mission. By leveraging technology in the cloud, our repeatable intelligent logistics platform capabilities helps transform contested logistics and enables rapid data integration for end-to-end visibility of sustainment solutions. As we will be discussing today, we know the military is in another evolution of warfare, as we've heard already in our key speaker introductory comments, and Leidos solutions allow for continuous operations when it's imperative to sustain the fight across contested domains and terrain. It's through AUSA events such as this one that we can come together and share ideas that help the Army continue to execute so that our industry team, along with government, can continue to deliver what soldiers need when they need it. So now let's get the ball rolling. And it's my great pleasure to introduce our first panel, Army in Transition, Sustaining Army 2030 and Transforming to Army 2040. I get to introduce our moderator for the first panel, Mr. Steve Rodriguez. Steve is a managing partner for One Defense, a next-generation strategic advisory firm that leverages machine learning to identify advanced software and hardware commercial capabilities and accelerate their transition into the defense industrial base. Steve has a wide defense, commercial, and intelligence background. He began his career with Booz Allen Hamilton in the national security sector, and his practice is an expert in game theoretic applications. He supported the United States intelligence community, Department of Defense, and Department of Homeland Security. He's also subsequently been a vice president of an artificial intelligence company and served as a chief marketing officer for an international defense corporation. Steve serves on the board of director or board of advisor for 10 venture capital-backed companies. He also serves as a senior advisor at the Atlantic Council and a life member at the Council of Foreign Relations. Steve is an Aggie. I didn't hear any whoas or anything in here. That may be good or bad. Okay, there's one. I see the horn symbol there. And also holds an MA degree from Georgetown University School of Foreign Affairs. He's published in Foreign Policy, War on the Rocks, National Review, and Rear Clear Defense. Steve and his great family live here in DC. Steve, thanks for being here and monitoring our first panel. I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
In the 5 minutes we have left. So right before coming here, I was actually decisively engaged in a major contested logistics campaign. I have a 4, 6, and 8-year-old and live right across the river here. And I've realized that LISCO actually stands for lots of sadness, crying often, as it relates to getting your children to school. Especially somewhat earlier than they planned, and certainly my wife did as well. I'd also like to acknowledge the passing of General Sullivan in January. I actually met him in high school in Berlin, Germany, with General Jowin, if you remember those two gentlemen. And you think about the Army and indeed AUSA, I believe he was president for 18 years, I think, of AUSA. And if we're about people and families, I think, having someone who's kind of oversaw the the transformation of the Army, and indeed AUSA, you think about the AUSA that he inherited in '98, I believe, that's pretty significant. So wanted to acknowledge just briefly a remarkable American and a United States Army soldier as well. Turning to the topic at hand, we have 5 panelists here, right? 5 panelists. And so there's going to be a lot of questions, and hopefully we'll have time for you to actually engage in a conversation as well. So this is not just a passive engagement. I will just say, when we think about contested logistics, I'll offer a brief anecdote. As a former asymmetric warfare group, OA, I was engaged in a debate. Actually, it was on Twitter, so I'm sure it's searchable, like all of my other brilliant observations. I was engaged in a debate in January 2022. January 2022. With 2 very, very well-known Russia experts, served in uniform. Some came out of the intelligence community. And the debate went as follows. They said, Steve, you served in Afghanistan and Central Asia, but you never served in Russia. You don't speak Russian. And I said, that's true. And they said, we are highly confident the the Russians can resupply the BTGs. Remember when those were a thing? Battalion Tactical Groups down the main ball route E95 from Belarus to Kyiv. And I said, well, I don't know. There's these things, and I'm sure you'll appreciate this. There's these thing called railheads. And they said, so? And I said, well, the railheads end here, right? I didn't even use PowerPoint. The railheads end here, and then they have to resupply using trucks from here to here, their objective. And they said, so? And so I just did, I went to A&M, so I'm not good at division or multiplication, but I can add. And I started adding up trucks. Like, I think I even used the little check marks, the number of trucks it would require. And the conversation ends with me being pilloried because I didn't speak Cyrillic. So I think it's emblematic of our need to understand the complexity of a dynamic issue, certainly understanding the region, of course, when I know we have many allied partners here, but also understanding the math and mass. I think the term now we use is affordable mass in waging contested logistics operations in a LISCO environment. So teeing this up, we have Major General Michelle Donahue from CASCOM, Mr. Rob Watts from the Contested Logistics CFT, retired Lieutenant General Richard Dick, Formica, and then, of course, we have Jerry Dwyer and, geez, there's so many of y'all, Michael Snow as well. So believe it or not, we have folks who can talk at every single aspect of this issue. And so we're going to dive right in. General Donahue, CASCOM plays a major role in the Army, a significant role in the Army in transitioning from brigade to division level constructs. However, most of us, certainly myself, have grown up in an Army optimized for COIN operations, especially at the brigade level. So how is CASCOM refining our logistics formations and tactics to ensure that what worked in a COIN environment is going to work in a future environment that we're talking about?
Thanks, Stephen, for that first question. So the good news about this is that we weren't tasked to prepare opening remarks, and we're going to jump right into the question piece of this. But first, I just wanted to, say thank you to everyone who is attending today. I see a lot of G4 teammates out there in the audience. I see a lot of allies and partners. I see a lot of industry partners that I've known over the years, and to General Brown, who I've spent a lot of time with over the last 7 or 8 months as part of the Chiefs transition team. Thanks for your leadership here, sir. And then to General Haley, who didn't mention that both General Smith, then Captain Smith, Lieutenant Kenna, and Major Haley were all in the same unit in Germany back in the late 90s. And so again, I was a product of both of your leadership and lots of mentorship to the young lieutenant. So thank you for that. I would not probably be here without both of you. So thank you. So I'm really excited to have just taken the reins down at CASCOM back in November timeframe. The chief said, Michelle, I'm done with you from a transition team perspective, so you need to move on. And I'm really appreciative, one, of the leadership of now Lieutenant General Mark Simmerly, who is at DLA, who just took over this past Friday. And so he really set me up for success. But I will tell you that the CASCOM team has been really, really rowing hard at this, building the Army of 2030 and helping to design the Army of 2040. One, from an experimentation perspective, from a concepts development perspective, very much nested with our sustainment seated partners with the Futures and Concepts Center underneath Army Futures Command. And then on the material development side of the house, I will say that we are absolutely integrated with and have integrated the 30 plus signature modernization efforts across the Army right now. That will absolutely transform how we sustain the Army, and essentially as well how we transform sustainment as we essentially as maneuver modernizes and also transforms in contact. So it's exciting times for CASCOM. I look forward to telling a little bit more, what we're doing from the DOTML PF perspective. But it is an integrated effort across many different teammates out there. We are nested across the sustainment community, both down at AMC as well as ASALT, the Army G4, and my partner that's sitting next to me here from the Contested Logistics CFT. So look forward to future questions about the .mil PF piece.
Great. So, Mr. Watts, what exactly is the Contested Logistics CFT, its mission, and how is it contributing towards the future fight, especially with regard to Army sustainment?
So I think it'd be crazy if I try to improve upon the definition that's really been laid out by General Brown, General Haley, General Smith. I think they laid out really why we exist and what our mission is. Everybody agrees that we've got to get after logistics, especially in this contested environment, and how we do that. So our job is to go out and look for material capabilities and develop the requirements that kind of lay out what it should do and what it needs to do so we can turn it over to ASALT, obviously. Hyper-focused on 5 or 6 efforts. I really appreciate General Smith's comment about the JCCL, because when we first stood this up, we decided, how do you do this? So we pulled out the JCCL, and in that it describes some desired capabilities that are required to get after this. And instead of standing up to CFT based off of things, and that, to me, that's one of the mistakes we made early on, and we didn't know. We were building the CFTs originally. Some of them, it was, HIMARS. Okay, we finish HIMARS, then what do you do? So what we did was took a portfolio approach. Sometimes we refer to as lines of effort, but it really is a portfolio, because we see this CFT as truly an enduring required CFT, because this problem is not going to go away after we deliver our first 4 or 5 capabilities. It's the thing that the environment's going to continue to change. The other signature modernization efforts are going to have to change. So we're going to have to continue to lift and shift. As far as our portfolio, what I would say is we are involved with the building of the 2030 and also design 2040. Now, I'll give you an example. For precision sustainment, our first portfolio, our first priority effort is predictive logistics. Now, most of the folks in this room know that we've been working predictive maintenance for a very long time. And so that one, I believe we've got some opportunities to really move. But what we see with predictive logistics is over time, we'll get from predictive logistics to what we describe, and General Hamilton really describes as precision sustainment. And, and I'd like to kind of give you a few examples of what I mean by that, because, in the future and everything that the generals have mentioned before about the tyranny of distance and the separation of everything, we can no longer afford to deliver 2 times or even 3 times what that particular location or AOR requires. We just don't. We won't have the assets, and we want to move it, or the assets to deliver in a lot of this. So we have to be a lot more precision. So we're going to need some AI and some other tools to really help us eventually. Now we see ourselves kind of building this as a kind of an incremental approach. I know that was a bad word for a little while, but it's the only way that you can get a capability out now like predictive logistics We believe we can get that one out for the Army of 2030. But over time, we have to incrementally improve it through software or whatever, so it grows to that truly precision sustainment capability. In the next area, the multi-domain distribution, I have to write that one down because I get tongue-tied with that one. What I would say is, given General Rainey's recent directives and focus, Joe Smith, I apologize for not telling you this before yet, but we're going to shift that really that naming, the naming of it to human machine integrated supply and distribution system. The reason is we want to really describe that human machine integration that this is going to require, and then you'll hear some of those capabilities in my next. But we really did want to highlight that because General Rainey is hyper focused on we have to leverage machines. We got to figure out how the human and machines are integrated on the battlefield, and just the command and control of some of those things. So the second effort that we're working right now is autonomous resupply vessel. Yes, a boat for the Army, but a more affordable version to where we can buy lots of them, hopefully, to where if you can kind of envision a swarm of these autonomous vessels going out to various island chains, delivering, and not having to beach, because we can have the UAVs come in, meet somewhere over the water, grab portions, and take that area of AOR's portion or whatever it is, ammo, food, blood, whatever it is, and take it to the point of need. No beach, unload, load, drive, unload. That's what a concept that we've started to build that brings in the autonomous trucks, autonomous MHE, autonomous watercraft, UAVs, obviously, and over this whole ecosystem, leveraging that capability to move stuff around the battlefield. And I say stuff, repair parts, all the commodities. And so that's the next one. The advanced power, still doing a lot of market research in that area. There's no lack of opportunities. It's just we really have to figure out what's the thing that we need to tackle as a CFT. We're really charged to go after the hard stuff, that's going to be, really game changing. So still doing a lot of market research on what it is in advanced power, how do we get off of fossil fuels and so forth. And there's a lot of things out there that, hydrogen power, some other things, but, is that something that can be ready for 2035? Because we have to have it around 2035 so we can get it filled about 2040, obviously. And what does that leave me with? Demand reduction. So we'll go after, some capabilities in demand reduction. A lot of market research we're doing in that. Adding manufacturing, I don't know that it's stalled, but what's that next level of added manufacturing? We've talked about manufacturing ammo at the point of need, so forth. Just what is it? So we're still in that research phase on demand reduction. But on that, and my team has coached me very well, and I hope they're watching. If we get the other three right, that will equal demand reduction as well. So, precision sustainment, obviously demand reduction, fewer trucks delivering fuel, fewer boats moving stuff around, and so forth. Same with the advanced power and energy. You get that right. We're not moving fuel around, and water production. I don't know how we get there, but I believe that's something we have to figure out. Once again, you get that right, demand reduction. And it's just that whole domino effect of fewer trucks equals fewer soldiers, which equals less food to move, less water, less. So it's just, I believe our first three portfolios, when you add those up, it equals demand reduction, but we're also going to go after something in that area. So I hope that makes sense.
Can I just make one comment? So we have increased from 1970 to now 374% from a fuel perspective. And if we want to continue to ensure that sustainment is not the crippling piece from a warfighter's perspective, we've got to reduce demand. And so every vehicle that rolls off of a production line ought to be hybrid electric and ought to be a net power producer. So just something to throw out there, 374%. We also, from a maintainability perspective, 37% from a maintenance growth perspective. The sustainment community cannot continue to be the growth industry for the United States Army.
Those are huge, huge statistics. Mr. Watson, Rob, as a A&M alum, I think you and your organization might be the most useful or interesting thing that's come out of Alabama in quite some time. Is that too soon?
I have to keep this rated PG, so I'm just going to.
No, that fascinating, and that's exactly the kind of commentary I was looking for. General Formica, you've got as former director of the Army Force Management, as well as having deep operational experience in theater. Where do you see the Army's sustainment mission in 2024, and where do you see it going? What do you see as needed from your perspective?
Yeah, thanks. Let me add my thanks to AUSA for hosting this. A lot of excitement about the thought of contested logistics around the department, and clearly something that we ought to be having these kinds of professional discussions on. So I really appreciate this. I thought I'd play to my strength and step back a little bit, because we can delve right into what is contested logistics and get into some of those specific capabilities. And I think we'll hear those throughout the day. But for me, it really begs the question, why contested logistics? What drives that? And how do we bring capabilities into the force, right? So the Army has a force management framework that brings capability in, right? Starts with the strategy. What do you want the Army to do? A lot of people don't pay much attention to that, but that's really fundamental, because we don't write the strategy. The strategy is given to us, right? We have a national security strategy, national defense strategy. The Army comes up with its plan, but it all begins with the strategy. What do you want the Army to do? And then that we ask the question, so what capabilities do we need to have to execute that strategy? And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Contested logistics and the capabilities we need in that environment are kind of the capabilities that Army will be required to have as part of the joint force. Then, and as much as we disdain processes and money, funding, right? It then comes down to, how do we bring those capabilities into the force? How do we do that? Can we do it faster? Can we do it with more agility? But ultimately, how do we bring those capabilities into the force? Then we have to ask ourselves, can we afford to organize, man, equip, train, sustain, station, and fund this force that we put together, these capabilities that we say we want? And then does it meet combatant commanders' requirements, and with what risk? That's the framework within which we're having this conversation. So, been referenced here already by General Brown, General Haley, General Smith. Starts with the strategy, national security strategy, focus on China, right? The national defense strategy tells us China's the pacing threat, but don't forget Russia's an acute threat. And oh, by the way, we have to address those other threats. North Korea, Iran, still have terrorism and transnational. So it broadens it a little bit, right? And that's how the strategy goes. Then there's a defense planning guidance that issues specific guidance to the services on where to focus. That's pretty important. But if we were to just, and this is the first challenge for the Army, if we were to just define ourselves by the pacing threat, we'd have a completely different Army than we think we might need. And a lot of the capabilities you'll talk about today will never require, right? Maybe we'd be all watercraft. In fact, interesting little anecdote, when I was the director of force management, I was told to divest watercraft from the Army because we weren't going to need it, right? And now here we are. So it really does start with the strategy. And all of those, then we start figuring out what kind of capabilities we want. And Army Futures Command, which has changed the way we do capability development in a real way, but they've defined an Army of 2030 and the Army that we want in 2040. And one of them talks about the ability to campaign, and the other talks about sustaining or endurance to prevail in protracted conflict. Both of those have really real implications for logistics and contested logistics. So when I think about the strategy and what does it mean for contested logistics, I am concerned that we as an Army have to decide, how do we respond to the strategy? What kind of capabilities do we really need? And do we apologize for not being a Pacific kind of focused Army? The OSD thinks about Navy and Air Force, right? There's a huge role for the Army in the Pacific, and we should not apologize for that. There's also a huge role for us in EUCOM. And oh, by the way, every time we write our strategy, and those at the higher echelons of our government want to think about just PACOM or just Russia, the Middle East reminds us that they're there. And sooner or later, we've got to build capabilities like contested logistics across all of those combatant commands. And so I was encouraged when General George, and he reinforced it yesterday here in this room, he talks about when he responds to the Army's addressing the strategy, we're a global Army. And so we've got to build contested logistics for a global Army, and that's going to mean a balance of capabilities, some that will enable us to provide for logistics in a contested Pacific theater, and others that will enable us to provide for logistics in a contested European or other theater. And then let me just finish this first tranche with, and as we go down this road, we will be tempted to focus on the M. And I was glad to hear, General Haley talked about it and others. This is not just an M fight. Contested logistics is going to require solutions across DOT-MIL PF. It's going to require us to think about how do we integrate with our joint partners who bring capabilities and to whom we bring logistics capabilities. And then we'll be dependent upon our allies and being interoperable or interchangeable with our allies. And then what does industry deliver? So with that, I'll pause and say thank you.
Excellent. And thank you for teeing up our commercial colleagues here as well. Let me turn to Mr. Dwyer or Jerry. So from your position, certainly at Deloitte, but also given your detailed background, one thing Mr. Watts talked about was, the irony, the tech guy struggling to turn on the microphone.
I didn't go to A&M, so.
Yeah. I'm still trying to figure out how to turn on my camera with Zoom. So Mr. Watts touched on this briefly around autonomous systems and resupply. When you think about autonomous or semi-autonomous systems, especially from a logistics perspective, they have a lot of practicality, as this has been well identified in sustainment operations. But from your perspective, from the commercial side of things, where do you see commercial industry having the greatest ability to support here, either from a magnitude perspective or in terms of near-term availability to support?
So first of all, it's a privilege to be here today. Thank you. I've been with Deloitte for 30 years, almost exclusively in the supply chain practice. So in serving commercial clients, I would say we operate in a constrained logistic environment, not a contested, but there's similarities. And I mean that humbly, there's similarities. I would say that the autonomous and semi-autonomous logistics capabilities, if you think about an evolution or a framework, they started with, more warehouse operations. We've gone from, things from automated loading, unloading, sorting, picking, palletizing, et cetera. But my clients have been thinking through, how do I extend that? And how do I do more with less? And I think, something you said, Mr. Watts, earlier about one of my key takeaways is the use of autonomous and semi-autonomous logistics robots and capabilities, which I'll describe beyond just what we have talked about around what I'll call robots, it'll enable you to do more with less. Let me give you a couple examples. I have clients in a variety of industries, whether aviation, oil and gas, telco, industrial manufacturing, and automotive. Needs are different, but what is consistent is their supply chain budgets, their logistics budgets are constrained. And what they're looking to do is, how do I extend the capabilities and the innovation in this space to new use cases? So for instance, as I think about, I think the opportunities are limitless. Let me give you a couple specific examples. In aviation, one of my clients is the largest domestic airline in the United States. Their operations are global, but they don't have footprint globally for repair and operation. So they work with partners. Oftentimes, we'll station, aviation mechanics and just a mechanic and a small force, call it in Tokyo or in major hubs, or whether it's Japan, used to be China, but around the world. And when we have an issue, a plane goes down, it has to be taken out of the line. We will use a variety of technologies. We will look at AR and VR for diagnosing a problem. We'll use visual AI to diagnose a problem. And then when we figure out what that problem is, we'll then move to the AR, VR. I will have the mechanic, put on what I'll call the equivalent of Google Glass, and they will work with headquarters, maintenance and operations, and they will literally see the part, the system, etc., and diagnose the problem. And we will deliver instructions in the glass to figure out how to fix it. That's one use case. Wow. You think about windmills, for energy generation, high capital cost. We have to keep those things running, but they require maintenance. They require visual inspection. Well, it's too expensive to put, and quite frankly, too dangerous to put a person up there. We will fly drones with the same visual AI that can inspect the surface quality on those windmills while in operation. Believe it or not, I mean, heretofore that was something we had to take that stuff down. We had to think about. We had to put someone up there, stop it, and now we can do it all real-time operation. And I think about oil rigs. When we need to resupply, we're not, we oftentimes have a part go down. We will use a drone. I mean, it's something probably the military is doing now, but we will use drones to resupply. We won't use planes. We'll use drones, and they're loaded to several thousands of pounds. So we'll do that. I'd say that something you said earlier about doing more with less, necessity is the mother of invention. I had to work with an NGO and the United States government on resupply into a conflict zone, and also one that we had a lot of refugee support. We needed to build manufacturing capability, but the local government said you can have one 3D printer. So what do? We load that 3D printer with the ability to manufacture 14 more 3D printers. That was allowed. They didn't think of it, but things like that. So as I think about where we can go with autonomous logistics and robots, I think the opportunities are limitless. I think that the technology and the entrepreneurship has to meet the use case. So the takeaway for the Army here, we can help you understand the current use cases and extend your thinking about where and how we're using some of this technology in what I would consider hazardous, risky environments. Obviously, a lot less risky and hazardous than the theaters in which you operate. But we can innovate together on some of those applications for you. I'd say the last thing I'd say is most of the companies that are doing this will share their development roadmap with you, and they will take you where the journey's going, and they'll say, where and how might you have needs that we can fit in here. The other thing, the facilities maintenance, when it comes to whether it's domestic, abroad, the same thing applies, whether it's robots to maintain facilities, robots to move equipment, robots or AR, VR to diagnose problems on particular equipment. All that's in the realm and the art of the possible. So I'd say that the use of these autonomous to semi-autonomous systems, I won't call them robots, I'll call them systems, will allow you to do more with less. You're only limited by your imagination in terms of the use cases, and that future, frankly, is now. So I'll pause.
I'd like to. Oh, go ahead.
So Jerry, I really appreciate what you brought up about the less demand, because it's no secret about our recruiting challenges that we have today. And so what I would say is the more tasks that we can offload on these machines that I mentioned, the more we can free up the war fighters to go do other tasks and really help fill that void that we're facing in the future. And the demand's probably going to be higher in this environment that we're talking about. The second thing is, I appreciate your comment about the oil rigs, because we were directed by our commander to go down and watch and see how they're kind of resupplying and everything, their rigs. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just like to add that this discussion on autonomy and human-machine interface really going to come down to making legitimate decisions about what must the humans do, and then what can the autonomous equipment do, and then do we have confidence that those autonomous vehicles or equipment are going to do what we've asked them to do? And that confidence factor is going to be really important. This is not a logistics or sustainment example, but shortly after I took over a Paladin PIM equipped Duvardi in 1998, I went to the first training session and one of the firing batteries, and I might as well have been in my unit in Germany in 1977. In the wood line, camouflage nets up, collimeters, aiming circles, and I'm like, what are you doing? Well, we're practicing for degraded ops. I don't want to practice for degraded ops. I want to optimize the capability of the Paladin. I want to see platoons moving. We're going to have to have the same kind of confidence in our autonomous systems as we move to human-machine interface, or we're just going to have nice technology sitting in our connexes in our motor pools.
Steve, can I make one more comment, please? As I forgot to mention it. The other thing I would think the Army may want to look into is the use of digital twins. That helps you do simulation. It helps you think through when a situation arises, you already have a digital twin existing. So we've built digital twins of aviation systems. We've built digital twins of, frankly, for a partner nation, their entire the equivalent of their FAA system. What this enables you to do is model in advance. Think about the likely scenarios that you're going to have to work through, and also you can do it in real time. So I just want to make sure that that was another technology that that can bring to bear, and that's a very real set of technologies that exist today. So, awesome.
So just one more comment about the digital twin piece. I was just up at Aberdeen yesterday and spent some time with ATEC. And so I know that from an ATEC perspective and from an industry perspective, you're always probably frustrated with the amount of time it takes for us to get through our testing phase. And so they are absolutely incorporating digital twinning into their own modeling and sims so that we can actually speed up the whole testing environment. So that was, to me, awesome to hear. But also, too, and I know Rick Marsh will probably talk about this in the next panel from a readiness perspective, but just the ability to also manufacture parts. And so I know Honorable Lohman is absolutely pushing forward to almost look at it like a repository of parts out there, which will, I mean, so once we have a digital twin, we'll be able to do that as well. And we'll be able to buy the IP, right? Or, it's almost like an Amazon, or, like the Apple repository. I can go buy a song, right? So absolutely. Thank you.
Given the way the conversation is going, you guys could probably just twin me or put up a chat GPT and this thing would run itself. Mr. Snow, thanks for your patience. I'm actually going to hit you with 2 questions, and then we'll kind of do more rapid fire as the conversation gets rolling here. So AFC and AMC, they serve as a connective tissue to industry and enable the Army to kind of leverage what's in the NSS is codified as a national security innovation base, but of course also the OIB that's been mentioned before. What does industry need to see from these commands to enable rapid innovation and best breed technology, especially from the private sector in these mission sets that we've been talking about here?
Okay. Thank you, sir, for inviting me to this event. This is a great opportunity to talk contested logistics, something that I tend to work on in most of my career and since I've retired. I'll start by talking a few things about environmental considerations. Contested logistics is all about speed, scale, things we can do faster and at scale, which could mean not only the magnitude of what we've got to do, but the distances and the locations where we've got to operate. Definitely longer lines of communications. Those lines of communications in Europe are probably more operational in consideration, but the lines in the Pacific will certainly be strategic. That last 1,000 tactical miles will be essential to be able to close with and do the things we need to do against our adversaries. And then I think logistically we'll be operating in more locations, and we're going to be operating what I call logistically independent operations. We'll have episodic relationship with those maneuver forces. So it gets to the technology. How do we engage across all fronts to ensure that we know what we have, we know what people need, and we can get it to where that it needs to be? It's all about data. Data is a commodity in contested logistics, and it's got to be controlled, and there's got to be access to data. Industry has to have a ready access to definitive data sources, without that information, we can't make the decisions that we need to make on how to approach a problem or develop a solution. In addition, what comes along with that is the authorities to operate in the networks, in the systems that the Army and other services use, Transcom and all those other organizations out there that have these definitive databases and have these systems that don't allow you to get in there and put things onto their networks and operate the way and test how we could operate in the future. This, I think, comes down to trust. We've got to develop those trusting relationships between industry and the organizations that we want to partner with. Partnering is the only way to get to the innovation that we need. Allowing industry in early to see what the problem is or what we believe the problem is. Allowing industry to help look at how to develop requirements that will get you to that end solution that you need. And then finally, allowing industry to share in the development activities, the solutioning of the project or the product, much in the same way that AFC and General Murray was getting equipment, getting capability out to the soldier, letting soldiers look at it, let soldiers provide feedback, tell the community what's working, what's not working, and how we want to improve that, improve those capabilities. Developing solutions is hard enough as it is. Like I said, with technology the way it is today, what we think may work today probably is not the ultimate solution, 2, 4, 6 months from now, a year from now. So we have to have that access, or we would appreciate that access to be able to do the things that we need to do to advance technology at the pace of need. Other activities that we probably need to continue to be involved in, things like RADAR, the Rapid Defense Experimentation Reserve, which is a joint thing. However, it's where logistics capabilities are being demonstrated every year to demonstrate whether they are doing the things that the community is looking for or modifying those capabilities to meet the challenges that we face. In addition, it's great that we get to put technology into things like Project Convergence. Every couple of years, putting our technology in there, demonstrating our wares, and then identifying potential gaps for future development effort. Technology is not a single event. Developing technology is not a single event. It's an iterative process, and like I said, what we think is needed today may not be needed in 6 months from now, 12 months from now, based on how the Army approaches, modernization and delivering solutions to the force. And then finally, I would just say we've talked about additive manufacturing tech packages. Not only having access to the definitive data sources from the service perspective, but tech packages we need to be able to share across the industry to where we can help work out solutions between ourselves and help deliver solutions on behalf of the Army. That's all I've got.
So I'm going to go right back to you. Let me highlight. I recently led and concluded a major national security commission with Secretary Esper and Secretary Deborah Lee James, and we had 10 recommendations. Mark Twain said, "Sorry, I wrote you a long letter. I didn't have time to write you a short letter." So final report, 14 bloody pages. Why? So you would actually read it. 7 of the 10 recommendations we put out there have already been adopted and enacted by HASC, SASC, and OSD, and some of them touch on some of these issues, both that Mr. Watts is talking about, as well as Mr. Snow. So, Mike, let me go right back to you. You talked briefly about this last tactical 1,000-mile mindset. We talked about this in our preparatory call. So, sensor to shooter is increasingly moving towards sensor to shooter to sustainer or sustainment model. So with that last tactical 1,000-mile mindset, if you can explain that a little bit more, and also how should the Army sustainment enterprise incorporate sensors, especially with modernized equipment in a LSCO environment?
Okay. Yeah, last tactical 1,000 miles. It's used to be we get, like we've talked about previously, everything is echeloned. We move stuff from the U.S., we move it to a staging base, we move it to a tactical logistics point, we deliver to the final unit location, wherever that may be. In an environment that we're talking about, a contested environment, it doesn't matter whether we're in the Pacific or whether we're in Europe. Those fighting fighting to the fight is going to result in the fact that we're going to have long lines of communications that either have to be, they'll have to be traversed, but they'll have to be protected also. So at the end of the day, geographically, we may not be able to travel based on access basing and overflight. We may not be able to go through the locations that we want to go through, or to change how we configure material from strategic to operational to tactical platforms that allow us to get to that destination. The example, last 1,000 tactical miles is the first island chain to Taiwan, or to China. That's the kind of distance and thought process we have to have in place when we're talking about delivering to through the last tactical or 1,000 miles. Now, how we do that, watercraft, UASs, I would offer there's going to be a ubiquity of UASs, air, ground, and sea, that are going to have to be employed to accomplish the task that we're talking about accomplishing. We're not going to be able to do it with the handful that we are presenting the force today. They'll have to be, think about them as attritable platforms. Nobody likes to lose stuff, but we're going to lose a lot of what we're talking about here. So we need to have the capacity to continue to moving it forward. Switching over a little bit to the sensors. I think we have censored out everything in the Army inventory, and we have a pretty good idea of how to understand that information, manipulate that information, and use that information to become more predictive and more precise. I would offer the challenge is less about sensors and more about computing at the edge. I can't send all that information back to AMC and for AMC or Transcom or the Joint Staff to have them give me a solution set. I need to be able to use the computing power that I have, or the tactical folks need to be able to use the computing power they have to transition that data to information and into their decision-making process. And whatever the output of that is, meaning small bits of pieces, will be delivered back to the enterprise solutions, so they can then incorporate them into future predictive or precise deliveries that they wanted or they have to choose to move. So like I said, how do you do that? Mesh data networks and all those other cool systems, satellites, space-based communications platforms. But again, it's going to be less about the sensor, more about the information from those sensors, and how do I make decisions based on that at the appropriate level. I think a lot of it's going to be done for.
So just a couple things. Great news. Last Friday, General Rainey approved the Predictive Logistics AROC. And so we've seen a lot of success. I was just up at Aberdeen yesterday and meeting with PEO C3T and as well as our mission command partners up there. And, so Mike, you mentioned we've had sensor data forever. We've seen it play out from an aviation perspective, and our Army's Artificial Intelligence Center up at Pittsburgh has done a lot of work on the aviation side to give us that decision dominance and those analytical tools out there that will help us from an aviation perspective. But this will focus us more on the ground side of it. And General Rainey's guidance was really clear last week in terms of making sure that we can pull off 3, 5, as well as maintenance fault data. Yesterday, he'd be really excited to know that when I sat there and saw the Mission Command PM that was up there, they've already, we're actually already there. And so we're already pulling off a lot of that 3, pretty much all the class 3 sensor data that's off of at least the Abrams platform right now. We demonstrated that actually out at Project Convergence 2 years ago. And used additional analytical tools out there that would then speed the decision-making cycle for a brigade support battalion to be able to essentially send distribution for both class 5 as well as class 3 forward within seconds. So I think the PL piece of what we're after, from a pull data off a platform to then transport it from across an agnostic network, I know we are absolutely nested with where the chief is going with C2 fix, as well as kind of his pivot into C2 next, to make that a little bit less burdensome on that tactical commander, to then being able to see the data, for sustainment leaders to actually understand what that data looks like, and then to put AI and ML tools on top of that, so that then systems can sense and then people understand. So I think we're actually on the right track to then get to where General Hamilton's trying to get to, and where the CFT is trying to go, forward with that whole precision sustainment piece. So I've sort of been that naysayer along the way of like, oh my goodness, this requirement, another requirements document. But I will tell you that I think we're actually coming together, just again, meeting with DevCom. I think we're all in on this. And so it's really promising.
All right. I know it's that Alabama thing, roll tide. So, on the data, ma'am, so to General Donahue's point, last week, General Rainey approved the abbreviated CDD. So now we've got to focus, we got to lift and shift to get after the CDD. And ma'am, I agree 100%. We've censored a lot of maintenance data and some other stuff, but now we got to get after all the other classes. And the other thing I would say, I think it was General Smith that talked about data interoperability or interoperability. To really get to a prescriptive capability to enable precision sustainment, we've got to receive data that we can consume from the Intel community, from other communities, joint partners, allied partners, and I'll just pull a thread on Intel. So we want this tool to tell us, when we get to precision sustainment, we want that capability to tell a commander, hey, you need to start moving some ammo to Island X today because it's going to take 10 days to get there based on the threat that's fed by the Intel community, based by the on the weather. So how it gets there is going to be part of this whole precision sustainment, because we're going to have to get there. When I was younger, we talked about just-in-time logistics. I'm not sure we ever really got there. We're probably going to have to get there on this one, and because we're going to be moving so much. So for the data, it is really the keys to the kingdom. I think it's really being able to manage it and then use it appropriately. And the last thing I'll say is, with the data, one of the things that they're toying with right now is having the ability, for a commander to look at his logistician and say, hey, what's the fuel, look like in these 3 islands, and being able to go through this AI tool and spit out those slides, within a minute or two, instead of going back, reading through spreadsheets and generating PowerPoint. And then our version of Siri, I think we call it Watts, but probably not. We call it, hey, Loggy, what happens if we change this operation from 5 to 10 days? And then in real time, it gives us that answer through generative AI, and it's very doable. It's getting the right data, getting it to where it's managed in a secure area, which will all be in classified, at this level. But imagine that tool, for a commander, because the Army loves to what if drills, because we have to, because things change all the time. But that scenario is, hey, this has changed. Hey, Loggy, what does that mean? Hey, sir, you're going to run out of fuel. Who said so? Well, Watts did, but anyway.
Well, Rob, you've completely screwed yourself. The response to the next RFI that y'all put out are going to be a whole bunch of industry proposals for Hey Loggy. See what you've done. So we got 5 minutes and 40 seconds left. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to jump to some of these questions, and feel free to answer them rapid fire. And if you want to do a 2-finger and jump in, go for it. But we'll do this cable news style. So let's start out with, I'll direct this initially to General Donahue. So General Formica highlighted, this gorgeous handwriting, by the way, highlighted the strategy to requirements issues. How are the COCOMs and component commanders highlighting and prioritizing what their requirements are, and who in AFC and or AMC is pushing these to our industry partners?
Well, so each of the COCOMs submit a nipple back through OSD, and those are then transmitted down to the services. But we also then, with each of our ASCC partners, as well as even with our TSCs out there, remain nested with their own theater campaign plans to understand their gaps. And so we go through a very deliberate process with AFC to kind of go through very much a threat-based look at each of those theaters. And so we just, having recently done a couple of iterations out in the Indo-Pacific, but we have, as General Formica highlighted earlier, have not lost sight on, our our lessons observed that are coming out of the European theater right now, as well as even the lessons observed that are coming out of the CENTCOM AOR as well. So I think we're nested with where we need to go from a material requirements perspective. And we are absolutely nested with where the CFT is going, but we also have our own portfolio of requirements that are underneath our seated who are nested up underneath Futures and Concept Center. And so we are absolutely tackling a lot of the watercraft gaps out there. Rob and his team are working on some of the autonomous features in line with, I know Trent Mills is over there from DARPA, but we are also looking after, kind of that fight tonight capability that we need from a watercraft perspective. We are also looking at, again, I was just up at Aberdeen. I keep on saying that, but it was pretty cool. And I got to see a BFDS tanker. And so that was a gap that we had from an MDO perspective back when General Lundy did the whole 17 Army gaps that we had, and with gap 4 being fuel. And so that tanker that I took through the AROC about 4 years ago, the fact that that it's like material release upon, right? I mean, this is where it takes a long time to get some of our systems through the gauntlet. But it was pretty cool to see a 9,000 K tanker up there that will absolutely, meet some of those gaps that we see in the European theater. And then to see a MET up there too, which is our medium equipment trailer, also another contested gap to be able to transport, essentially, oversized equipment through the highways of Europe as well, and to get underneath bridge overpasses. So 2 of those things. And then also we just signed for our first boat. Well, not the first one, but our first modernized boat, the Maneuver Sport Vessel Light, that we will demo inside of Project Convergence, which is essentially, again, another, DD-250 to the Army. And we've got Army Mariners on that boat right now, getting ready to basically sail down to San Diego for Project Convergence here. So again, we do nest both theaters from a gap perspective, and absolutely are tackling a lot of different requirements out there.
So if Jen Judson's still here, I think the most newsworthy item that I've heard is that Aberdeen is cool. Let me ask 2 brief final questions. One, let me go, Rob, and feel free to, gentlemen on the end, to tee up, and then I'll direct the final question towards General Formica. So, Rob, you mentioned advanced power. Industry is working hard on nuclear capabilities. For a second, I thought that said SMH, for shaking my head. Small SMR, small modular reactors. Are we looking at this near to midterm option? And what regulatory or policy challenges are you facing there?
How to work this thing. So the short answer is yes, we are engaged in those capabilities. Obviously, a lot of challenges with that. I'm told that it's a lot more stable. Some of the concerns are no longer there, but for General Smith and the G4 team, obviously policies are going to have to change to bring that to fruition. But the other challenge we've identified is where you can actually employ it. A lot of the countries, like in Europe, we're not even going to be able to take it into the country unless we change some agreements. So a lot of technology out there that could be leveraged, but there's a lot of work that has to be done in the building and Pentagon and others to really enable it.
Great. And last question, General Formica, sustainment modernization concepts, we talked about this in our preparatory call, need to be well nested across services. And of course, they require substantial integration with the industrial base to meet the challenges both of competition and conflict. When you talk with leaders across the department, so this is kind of an extramural, not just Army focus, as well as those in industry, what can we or should we be doing to improve from a defense policy or an industrial based policy perspective?
Well, that's a loaded question. I mean, there's a lot. We've heard already about the defense industrial base and the challenges that we have. I think we're going to hear more about that in a subsequent panel. So investing in the defense industrial base, critical to our ability to meet contested logistics. especially when we're thinking about it strategically, not just operationally or tactically. And then we've referred to it again several times. I talked about it in my opening comments. We're going to have to be nested jointly, understanding what capabilities we're going to bring, we're required to bring, and what capabilities we need to depend on from other services. I think you've heard that from this panel, and then with our allies. And I think all of that needs to be nested and brought together so we can have an Army approach to contested logistics, but that's not siloed, right? It's part of a broader Defense Department capability.
So apart from reevaluating all of their poor life choices that led them to participate in this panel, I think you can clearly see there's great relationships and great mind share on these very, very difficult and challenging issues. So I'd ask, first off, thank you, General Brown and the AUSA team for inviting all of us here. And please join me in thanking our panelists as well.